My name is Camila Torres. I was 34 when my entire life changed in one afternoon, not because I wanted it to, but because I refused to keep my mouth shut. I had worked at Halverton and Monroe Biotech for nearly 8 years. It wasn't just a job. It was my career, my identity, my pride. I rose from an entry-level assistant to senior project lead in one of the most competitive departments in the company. I handled high-stakes development briefs, led international teams, and mentored new hires. I stayed late, I worked holidays, I missed birthdays, and I did it all because I believed I was building something meaningful, something earned. But what I didn't realize until that year, until him, was that no matter how hard you work, how good you are, or how many extra hours you put in, there are men in power who will still see you as nothing more than an opportunity. His name was Travis Belden, a newly appointed director of operations who transferred from the London office, charismatic, confident, and completely drunk on his own authority. He was the kind of man who asked female colleagues if they were really committed to leadership or just playing dress-up in the boys' club. He loved to corner women in the elevator and comment on their perfume. And when he looked at me, it wasn't with respect. It was like I was a snack he hadn't unwrapped yet. At first, I tried to handle it quietly. I ignored the remarks. I dodged the invitations. I made sure never to be alone with him. But then came the conference trip to Chicago. It was supposed to be a 3-day strategy summit. Our whole division was attending. The company booked us in a downtown hotel, and the first night, after a long day of panels, Travis cornered me in the hotel bar. I said I was tired. He said I owed him a drink for how much he praised me during the meeting. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't. He reached for my wrist and pulled me close. Too close. "Don't pretend you don't like the attention," he whispered. My body went stiff. I yanked my arm back and left without a word. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened, smiled at me in the elevator, called me champ in front of the others, and I realized something. This wasn't just harassment. This was control. He knew what he was doing. He wanted me to feel trapped. When I got back to the office, I filed a formal complaint with HR. I expected discomfort, maybe even some retaliation, but I believed the system would protect me. I was wrong. A week later, I was called into HR again, this time with the head of legal. They told me there were concerns about my team's morale, that I was creating a hostile environment, that until further notice, I was being placed on administrative leave. I was stunned. I sat there blinking as they slid a manila envelope across the table. Severance paperwork, a non-disclosure agreement, a quiet exit. Travis got a promotion the following month. I remember walking out of that building with the wind knocked out of me. Everything I'd built, everything I sacrificed, reduced to a whisper. Silenced. But what they didn't know is that I recorded everything. Every message, every comment, every advance. And I wasn't going to be their scapegoat. This is the story of how I turned their silence into screams. I stared at my phone long after the HR rep hung up. "Your termination is effective immediately. Please return any company property within 72 hours. No explanation, no meeting, no goodbyes. Just a cold voice, reading from a script." I was alone in my apartment, still in the blouse I had worn to work that morning, though now it felt like a costume from another life. That was the day my career, my financial stability, and my identity were all stolen in one sentence. It wasn't just being fired, it was the way they did it. No investigation, no questions, just a door slammed shut after I finally had the courage to speak up. The silence after whistleblowing is the loudest thing I've ever heard. For days, I wandered through my apartment like a ghost. The sunlight didn't hit the same. The kitchen felt unfamiliar. I kept checking my email out of habit, forgetting that I no longer had access. My friends, former coworkers, had gone radio silent. Not one text, not one, "How are you?" They were scared. I knew that. But it still hurt. Worse than that was my own family. My mother's voice crackled over the phone line. Camila, are you sure you didn't misunderstand something? Maybe it's just how he talks. You shouldn't have made a scene, honey. These things ruin reputations. Whose reputation, Mom? Mine or his? That night, I sat on the floor with a cheap bottle of wine and opened my laptop. I didn't want revenge. I wanted proof. I wanted the truth to stand taller than the smear campaign I knew was coming. I started by documenting everything. Every inappropriate comment, every time he accidentally brushed against me, every forced smile I wore in the conference room. Then I remembered the voice memo app. I had recorded one of our one-on-one meetings 3 weeks ago, when he told me I should dress a little less aggressively and smile more to keep the team calm. I found the file. Travis Carter, clear as day. It's just, when a woman is that ambitious, Camila, it comes off as intimidating. You don't want the board thinking you're difficult. I stared at my screen, jaw clenched. That wasn't leadership. That was control. And I had more. Emails, Slack messages, even screenshots of him praising my strategy only to present it as his own in client meetings. That's when I realized I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to expose it, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a woman who understood what it was like to be talked over, passed over, and finally pushed out. That night, I typed women-led employment law firms into Google. The first result was Leah Grant and Associates. Her firm's tagline, "We don't just fight cases, we fight systems." I clicked. Something inside me sparked. For the first time in days, I didn't feel small. The law office was quiet, almost too quiet, as I sat across from Leah Grant for the first time. She didn't take notes at first. She just watched me, calm, composed, but with eyes that missed nothing. When I finished telling her everything, every whisper in the hallway, every stolen credit in meetings, every inappropriate joke, I expected her to give me the same look everyone else had: discomfort, pity, doubt. Instead, she leaned forward. "You're not the first, but if you're ready, you could be the one who stops it." That was the moment I realized I didn't need to prove I was right. I needed to prove they were wrong. Leah began gathering the puzzle pieces with me. Emails, recordings, meeting notes. She had a team that moved in silence like strategists in a war room. Everything had to be done without tipping them off. If they knew what we were building, they'd bury it fast. Meanwhile, I was still unemployed. I was burning through savings, skipping rent payments, and living off cheap coffee and microwave dinners. But every morning I got up and worked the case, like it was my full-time job, because it was. One night, I found a message from a former intern. Her name was Tessa. "I saw what happened to you." I wanted to say, "It happened to me too." But I couldn't say anything. I was too scared. That changed everything. Tessa had no idea how powerful her message was. With her permission, we added her experience to the case. And soon after, 2 more women reached out. There wasn't just smoke, there was fire, and I had matches. But the firm? They weren't sitting still either. They sent me a cease and desist letter. They tried to gaslight me through statements in the media. "We've always championed women in leadership. Ms. Torres's claims are categorically false." This is a disgruntled former employee. I read those lines and smiled. They were scared. They should be. Because the truth wasn't just coming. It was about to be screamed into every boardroom in the city, and I wasn't doing it for revenge anymore. Was doing it for every woman who ever got told, "You're too loud. You're too confident. You're not a good fit." The moment we filed the formal complaint, everything changed. Not just in theory, in reality. Within 48 hours, Leah's office got a warning that my former employer had lawyers scanning everything we submitted. They were preparing for war, and they weren't planning to lose to a woman they'd discarded like an old calendar, but they didn't know me. They didn't know what I had left to lose. Because when you've already lost your job, your reputation, and the life you thought you'd have, you stop playing defense, you strike. Leah advised me to keep things quiet until we had full protection. But something in me snapped when I saw the CEO, Harold Denton, speaking at a Women in Business conference. He stood on that stage, smiling into cameras, talking about safe spaces for women, while my stomach turned. No one gets to rewrite the story while the victims are still bleeding, I told Leah. We made a decision. We would go public, strategically. First, we created a timeline. The emails they didn't know I'd saved. The meetings I'd recorded with a backup. Mike. The policies they'd quietly ignored. And the patterns of silencing that stretched back years. Leah's team built a digital vault, a press kit ready to drop if they dared smear me again. We weren't just preparing to defend. We were preparing to destroy their narrative. Then came the internal HR leak. A former HR manager anonymously sent us a file titled Retention Report, Female Staff. It included resignation quotes like, Toxic Boys Club. They smile at you and stab you at performance reviews. It's always, she's emotional, never he's aggressive. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a pattern, a culture, a system, and we had proof. I began drafting my public statement. Not a sob story, not a revenge rant, a declaration. My name is Camila Torres. I gave 10 years of loyalty to a company that asked me to stay quiet when I was harassed. I reported it. I was fired, but I won't disappear. Because I'm not alone. We didn't release it yet. Not yet. Leah had one final card to play, and it would either make us legends or bury us in litigation. But we were done hiding. We weren't whistleblowers anymore. We were storm starters. The media didn't come knocking. We kicked the door in. Leah coordinated with a top-tier journalist from The Atlantic, someone known for exposing corporate hypocrisy. We handed over just enough. The internal emails, the leaked HR report, a sanitized version of my statement. It was bait, but it was real, and it worked. 3 days later, the headline hit. She reported sexual harassment. She got fired. But she had receipts. Within 12 hours, my phone exploded. Old coworkers reached out. Strangers shared their own stories. And Harold Denton? He vanished from LinkedIn faster than a scandal can spread. But I wasn't ready for what happened next. Because for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not pretend powerful like in those fake team-building seminars. Real power. The kind that comes from surviving hell and still walking forward in heels. I walked into my neighborhood cafe and someone whispered, "That's her." Not in shame, in awe. Then came the backlash. The trolls crawled out of their holes. Anonymous emails. Fake profiles posting lies. She made it up. She was bitter. She slept her way in. They weren't just trying to discredit me. They were trying to erase me. But what they didn't know was that I was ready. I posted a video. Not a polished PR piece. Just me in a hoodie, no makeup, real lighting, real voice. You think I'd risk my career, my safety, my sanity for clout? No. I risked it because I was tired of watching other women break in silence. If you're going to come for me, at least bring something stronger than misogyny. It went viral. Offers poured in. Podcasts, speaking gigs, and then an email from a top consulting firm. We've been following your story. Would you be open to building a workplace equity division from scratch? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because this time I wouldn't be the woman begging for a seat. I'd be designing the table, Leah warned me. They're going to try to buy your silence next. She was right. The company sent a settlement offer, $2 million, no admission of guilt, full NDA, disappear and take the cash. But I didn't want hush money. I wanted a microphone. The email sat in my inbox for 3 days, $2,000 if you walk away. The number stared back at me like a bribe dressed in luxury. For a moment, I imagined it. The house I could buy, the student loans I could erase, the comfort I had never been allowed to feel. But then I thought about every woman who sat across from me in HR and whispered, "Please don't say I told you this." But the same thing happened to me. And I knew. They weren't offering me justice. They were offering me silence, gold-plated and guilt-free. So I wrote back with one line. You don't own my voice anymore. Leah and I launched the Empower Equity Collective the same week. We didn't wait for funding or press approval. We built a platform from scratch, a database of anonymous stories, legal resources, and a directory of trauma-informed employment lawyers. Within a month, our inbox had 2,300 stories. A Black woman in Texas fired for her hair. A Latina engineer in Arizona demoted after maternity leave. A queer designer in Chicago harassed by her CEO and then gaslighted into silence. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And it had been happening for decades. The collective caught fire. Media coverage exploded. We were on Vice, The Cut, even the New York Times. Celebrities started sharing our stories. Someone wrote in our comments, "Camila's not just a whistleblower. She's a blueprint." And just like that, my name, once used in whispered warnings and office gossip, was now tied to something unstoppable. Then, the firm panicked. A new email came, not from legal, from the board. "We believe in change. Let's explore restorative justice together." They didn't want justice. They wanted control, so I replied, "Change isn't a committee, it's consequences. You had your chance. Now it's mine." The day the CEO called, I was doing a live stream, not a fashion stream, not makeup tips or lifestyle hacks. This time, I was interviewing a former VP who had been pushed out for refusing to fire a pregnant employee. The views were climbing, 60,000, 90,000, 112,000, when my phone buzzed. Unknown caller, Manhattan, NYI, let it ring. 2 minutes later, a text arrived. "Camila, it's Evelyn. We should talk. Privately." Evelyn Hart, the same woman who smirked during my termination, the one who told HR, "She's just not the image we want to project," the woman who promoted my harasser twice. Now she was texting me like we were old friends. I posted a screenshot of the message, redacting her number, and captioned it. "Funny how they call you unprofessional until you become untouchable." The post went viral in under an hour. 3 days later, I was invited to speak at SXSW, not just a panel guest. Keynote. The email said, "Camila Torres represents a new era of corporate accountability." I stood on that stage, looking out at thousands of people, some crying, some clapping, some standing with arms folded in quiet respect, and I told them, they fired me to keep the system clean, but I was never the stain. I was the mirror. That night, "I Am Camila" trended worldwide. More stories poured in. A group of interns in Berlin started a global map of workplace injustice. A university in Toronto renamed its Women in Leadership Scholarship after me. I got a letter from a mom in Istanbul who said her daughter used to hide her queerness, until she watched one of my interviews and said, "Maybe I'll be like her." Then, Evelyn emailed again. "We're open to a settlement. Let's align on terms." I forwarded it to our legal team, then hit delete, because I no longer wanted a deal. I wanted a reckoning. The package they offered was generous. $3 million in cash, a gag order that would bar me from speaking about the company ever again, a clause that said I couldn't join or advise a competitor for 10 years. They called it a healing proposal. I called it a bribe wrapped in PR language. Evelyn's assistant left a voicemail. "We believe this can be a fresh start for both parties." Both parties? They erased my career, smeared my name, and labeled me unstable. But now I had something they didn't. Leverage. My following had grown past 700,000. Major media outlets were running with my story. Young professionals were quoting my posts in job interviews. Even brands who never took sides were DMing me, asking to collaborate. So I asked my lawyer one question. Can I counteroffer with something they'll never expect? He smiled and said, "Camila, they're already scared of what you'll do next. Let's make them panic." We sent back a proposal of our own. No NDA, no silence, no erasure. Instead, we asked for the company to publicly acknowledge their mishandling of my case, create a $10 million fund for LGBTQ+ workplace justice, put me on their advisory board for inclusive leadership with full voting rights. It was unheard of, uncomfortable, and beautifully unignorable. They took a week to respond. Their reply came not through legal channels, but through a press leak. Whisper to a top journalist, Camila Torres is just trying to stay relevant. That's when I knew. They weren't going to fight fair, but I no longer played by their rules anyway. It started with a camera, a cup of coffee, and a question. What happens when truth costs your career? I filmed it in my living room. No makeup, no edits, just me and my story. What they did, what they covered up, what they tried to buy silence for. I uploaded it with one line in the caption. They fired me for being gay, but I'm not scared of them anymore. Within hours, it had 800,000 views. Within a day, it crossed 5 million. Within 3 days, every single news outlet had picked it up, and Evelyn Langston's face was trending for all the wrong reasons. I didn't name names in the video. I didn't need to. The world connected the dots faster than the PR team could scrub them. Former employees started commenting, I saw this too. They did something similar to me. I was told not to say anything. A dam had broken, and I was the one who cracked it open. Then something unexpected happened. Stockholders began to email me. One said, if half of what you say is true, they're in breach of our ethics contract. Another sent me internal memos anonymously, and one bold message said, we want Evelyn out. Will you help? I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I had momentum, I had voices, I had proof, but most importantly, I had them cornered. I woke up to a subpoena on my doorstep. A courier in a suit handed it to me with a blank expression. The company was suing me for defamation. They were trying to shut me down, legally. But what they didn't realize? I wasn't alone anymore. My video had inspired thousands to speak out, and some of them were lawyers, civil rights attorneys, LGBTQ+ advocates, and even former prosecutors started reaching out. They're bluffing, one said. You have enough evidence to countersue. I was no longer playing defense. Then came the second blow, from the inside. One of the company's own executives anonymously leaked a USB drive to my lawyer. Inside were recordings, emails, internal Slack conversations. They proved everything. They had known. They had joked. They had agreed to fire me after I came out. I held the proof in my hands, shaking. But it wasn't just my vindication. It was the smoking gun. The legal team drafted our response. Not just a defense, a countersuit for wrongful termination, discrimination, and emotional damages. And then came the press conference. I stood at the podium, reporters buzzing, lights blinding, but I didn't flinch. I read the opening lines aloud. I was fired for being gay. I was told I didn't fit the image. Today, I'm telling the world, and I'm not alone anymore. The internet erupted again, and this time, they couldn't put the fire out. The board called an emergency meeting. Shareholders demanded resignations. Evelyn Langston vanished from LinkedIn within 24 hours. But this wasn't revenge. This was reclamation, and I was just getting started. The courtroom was packed. Camera crews lined the back wall. Reporters whispered into their microphones. Every bench was filled with spectators. Activists, law students, ex-employees, even people I'd never met who said, I saw your video. I had to be here, and there I was, sitting behind the plaintiff's desk, suing the company that once told me I didn't belong. Evelyn Langston walked in flanked by a trio of lawyers in tailored suits. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to, because I wasn't the same woman she fired. I was the face of a movement now. Our opening statement was brutal. My lawyer stood and said, this is not just about one woman. This is about every marginalized voice that's ever been silenced. For the sake of brand image, it's about systemic discrimination, and it ends today. The jury nodded. Some even took notes. We started with the leaked emails. Every slide, every message displayed on the court screen made jaws drop. Let's keep the team looking clean-cut. She doesn't scream leadership. Too much rainbow, not enough revenue. The room grew quieter with each reveal. Evelyn's lawyers squirmed. She just stared straight ahead. Then came the witnesses. Former colleagues testified how I was excluded from meetings, how my ideas were taken and presented by others. One quietly admitted, "We were told not to promote her. It came from above." The defense tried to spin it. They claimed budget cuts, restructuring, nothing personal, but we had the hiring timelines, the paper trail, the truth. And then finally, I took the stand. I looked the jury in the eyes and told them, I showed up every day. I worked twice as hard, and I was punished for who I loved. You don't have to clap for me. You just have to see me. And they did. The judge banged the gavel. Closing arguments would come next, but we already knew. The truth had landed. The day of the verdict felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I was calm, eerily so. My lawyer kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying, "It doesn't matter what happens in there. They already heard me." But deep down, I was still that girl who once begged to be seen. And this was the moment the world would decide if I ever mattered at all. The jury filed in. Some of them glanced my way. One woman, probably mid-40s, nodded, just once. And I knew. The foreman stood. In the case of Evelyn Langston and Edgeworth Consulting, we find in favor of the plaintiff, damages awarded $3.5 million. The room erupted, reporters shouted, gasps echoed. I heard someone whisper, "She did it." Evelyn didn't flinch. She just blinked, slowly, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath for a decade. Then something I never expected happened as the cameras swarmed. A man in a sharp suit approached me. I recognized him immediately. Ronald Strayer, CEO of Arcline Ventures, one of the biggest PR firms in the world. He didn't shake my hand. He simply leaned in and said, "We saw how you handled this. We want to hire you, not as a consultant, as our new diversity and ethics officer. Full authority, full salary, full visibility." I stared at him. "Why me?" I asked. He smiled. "Because you didn't just win a case. You made people listen." That night, I walked out of the courthouse not just as someone who won a lawsuit. I walked out as someone who took every lie, every dismissal, every "you're not what we're looking for," and turned it into leverage. I didn't just take back my life. I claimed the power they tried to bury, and now, I wasn't the story. I was the one writing it. It had been 6 months since the verdict. And yet, the ripple effects were just beginning. I walked into my new office at Arcline Ventures, floor-to-ceiling windows, custom desk, my name etched in gold on the door. Evelyn Langston, Chief Diversity and Ethics Officer. The same week, I started. Edgeworth announced mass layoffs. Evelyn resigned. No public statement, no redemption arc, but justice. It doesn't always look like flames. Sometimes it looks like silence, the kind that follows a reckoning. I didn't return to Edgeworth physically, but I did return in legacy. One of my first initiatives at Arcline, creating a speaker series that toured corporate America, called Whispers They Ignored. I stood on stages across the country, told my story, and watched as women, Black, brown, queer, trans, stood up and said, "This happened to me too." And they no longer whispered. One day I received a handwritten letter, no return address. It read, "You don't know me, but I watched your story unfold. I was on the edge. But then I saw someone like me not just survive, but rise. Thank you." There was no name, just 3 words at the bottom. Keep being loud. I folded it carefully, placed it in my drawer next to my first job rejection letter, and I smiled, because I wasn't just a survivor of discrimination. I was proof that telling the truth out loud could be louder than any boardroom door slamming shut. This was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the script they handed me, and now, every time I hear someone say, "She doesn't look like leadership," I reply, "No, I redefined what it looks like."